let's create our first Xamarin Forms project using Visual Studio. I've got Visual Studio 2013. I'm going to launch that. Again, I'm using the professional version. If you're using the Express edition, Xamarin will not work with it. It needs to be professional or higher. Same if using 2015, the community version will not work. So I'm going to start a new project. I'm going to do a cross-platform project within Visual C#, and we have our two Android iOS and our Xamarin.iOS and Xamarin.Android projects, which are the blank apps, native portable or native shared, and then we have our two forms projects. So one again using portable class libraries, one using shared code. I'm going to choose the Xamarin.Forms Portable, give it a name. So I'm going to call it Xam Forms Demo 1. And it's going to create the project for us. And in doing so, it's going to create actually 4 different projects within our solution. So here's our solution. We get a Getting Started with Xamarin Forms page here. Notice there's a link here to Charles Petzold's book, which we're using in our course. So you'll want to download that. It's free. And then they have some pre-built templates you can get as well, and other information here. Let's look at the Solution Explorer for a minute. So we have our 4 different projects in the Solution Explorer. The first one is our portable class library. This is going to be our shared environment. Then we have one for Droid. We have a project for iOS and a project for Windows Phone 8.0. Notice the Droid one is bold. That's going to be our starting project. And to make any of these a starting project, I can right-click and choose Set as Startup Project. So if I were to test this now, it's going to want to use the Droid project. If I change this to iOS, it's now going to want to test that either the device or on one of the emulators that I have available on my Mac. By the way, you will need to set up your Mac and have it connected to Windows Studio. And you can do that here through the Mac agent. So in the Mac agent, you will find your Mac and you will need to connect to it. I'm already connected. So when I choose to test this, it will send it over to my Mac and test it there. Okay, let's take a look at what's here. In terms of the portable class library, there is a C# file called app.cs. This is our shared code. And out of the box, this simple template is creating a new content page, giving us a stack layout, which means different controls are going to be in a vertical sequence. And in this case, we only have one child control, and that's a label that is centered and has the text, "Welcome to Xamarin Forms." Now I should say the text here is centered within that label on the X coordinate. There's also a Y line. And we'll look at different options we can use within these different controls. Okay, so that's my interface. Now what's going to happen in the Droid, I'm going to make my Droid the startup project. There is a main activity CS program, which is going to tell us which is going to tell the system what icons to use. Those are in our assets and our resources. And it says load application, new app. So that's going to come back to this app.cs. So it's going to use the code there in creating our interface. Now, it's a little problem here. And you'll notice that that is underlined, and we're getting an error down here saying type or namespace app could not be found. So out of the box, we haven't written any code, but we're already getting an error. And this seems to be a common problem as I've researched this. And the best thing to do, of course, is to go to Google, and I would just enter the type or namespace could not be found, and see what you find there. And I found several different solutions, but the simplest one, and the one you should probably always try first, is to rebuild your project. So I'm going to go back to my solution, choose Rebuild Solution. And you'll notice that squiggly went away. So now let's go ahead and test this. I'm got my emulators here. I'm just going to click this drop down box so you can see what's there. So it's showing my default is this Nexus S 40 by 800 emulator. Here's the other 4 that I had available to me through the AVD manager. If I want to use the Nexus S, this is going through the Android manager. It's one that's currently open. So I'm just going to click that and have it go to that emulator. I'm going to log in, go to my apps, now it's still building or creating the project, and here's my project now running on the emulator. Welcome to Xamarin Forms, and it is centered. Okay, I'm going to come back to Visual Studio. I'm going to go to debug and say stop debugging. Let's just make a quick change to this. I'm going to come back to my Xamarin Forms demo app.cs code. I'm going to change the text here to South Mountain Community College. And so now I'm going to rerun this. And you can see that the text has changed in the emulator. Come back over here. I'm going to stop debugging. Let's test this on the iOS side. So on the iOS side, we have a main.cs. I'm going to make this now my startup project. In the debugging dropdown, I can choose device. And so if I had my iPhone or iPad connected to my Mac, I could launch directly that device, or I can use an emulator. So let's just choose the iPhone 6 emulator. And I'm going to click it. And now it's going to send my code over to the Mac. And build it within Xcode. And launch the emulator on the Mac. So here's my iPhone 6 emulator running on the Mac, and there is what we get, South Mountain Community College centered in the app itself. Okay, so again, I'm going to debug. I'm going to stop debugging. And now let's test this on our Windows phone. So I'm going to make that the startup project. And I have a number of emulators here that I can use. And we get that Hyper-V is not enabled error. So now I'm going to go back and enable Hyper-V and reboot my computer. So before I do that, I'm going to save everything here. I'm going to close Visual Studio. I'm going to close my emulator here because I'm going to reboot anyway. Let's go into our control panel. And enable Hyper-V. And I'm going to restart. Okay, so I've rebooted my computer and brought back the Xam Forms demo project in Visual Studio. I have right-clicked on the WinPhone project to make it the active or the startup project. And since we just went to the iOS side, I'm going to go back to my solution and just rebuild. Sometimes strange things happen when you port stuff over to the Mac and back. So it never hurts to rebuild. That's probably my first thing I do if I have any problems. So now we're ready to try the Windows Phone emulator. So I'm going to click on the emulator I've chosen. The emulator launches. It's loaded the operating system. And I can see down here at the bottom that Visual Studio is still building the project. So you can see a progress bar here. These little icons flashing back and forth show that it's still rebuilding. We're still building. And there is our Xamarin project with South Mountain Community College in the label.